Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1214, 1214, Friday, August, August the 7th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay folks, it's okay to let the women and children out of the basement to watch today's TowerGate video. I'm a little less angry than I was yesterday, so possibly I'll be able to control my temper and my language. I'm going to try to keep it clean today, so yes, I think you can allow the women and children out of the basement to watch the TowerGate video today. And you should, because we have some very important Spygate news today. And the first thing we're going to talk about is something that's, I think, very related to Spygate, and it's the newest bombshell information that came out yesterday regarding Seth Rich. Seth Rich. Seth Rich is a very important part of the Spygate story because the entire basis for the Trump-Russia investigation had to do with the accusation that Trump was coordinating with the Russians to hack the DNC and then funnel that information to WikiLeaks so they could release it. That was, a big part of the early narrative that was used to launch the investigation into Trump, and it's also was brought up in the Steele dossier, so to speak, so-called Steele dossier. So let's go ahead and look at the revelation that came down yesterday for those of you who have not heard it, and then see if I can offer a little analysis. I have a bit of an alternative view from what the story is reporting, but let's go ahead and I'll give you the actual story that's being reported yesterday by quite a few different major media outlets, and then I'll give you some alternative analysis of what I think may be going on here and how it may affect the Durham investigation. So let's go ahead right here and get started. So yesterday we learned that a New York Judge Sarah Netburn, Netburn, Sarah Netburn, is requesting testimony from Julian Assange in the case brought by the parents of Seth Rich versus Fox News. The judge has made the request to the UK court. The judge has determined that the case cannot be brought to conclusion without testimony from Assange. The judge states in her request that permitting Assange to be questioned will serve the national interest of justice and judicial cooperation. The case is currently in the discovery phase, and the Court of Appeals overturned a lower court decision allowing the case to, which is a defamation case, to go forward about a year ago. So let me give you kind of the background, because there's been a lot going on with the Seth Rich case. So what happens is this man who used to be a contributor on Fox News, Ed Butowski, private citizen, is friends with this woman, Ellen Ratner, who also was like a media person. And Butowski had learned from Ratner that Assange told her that that the leaks did not come from Russia, the DNC emails, whatever, did not come from Russia, but rather came from Seth Rich, and that his brother Aaron was also involved. So Butowski goes on Fox News, and he talks about this. And of course, this leads Seth Rich's parents to file a defamation suit. And the first time, the case gets shot down. But then it goes to the appeals court. And then the appeals court overrules the lower court and says, yes, this case can now go forward. So the case is a defamation case, which is Seth Rich's parents versus Fox News for defaming their son by allowing Butowski to come on Fox and talk about the fact that Rich may have been involved in the giving the emails to WikiLeaks. Now, this could be the straight story. Okay, this could be the straight story, just as we're getting it. So, as I said, they're in the discovery process right now. So This is why the judge has petitioned this court in the UK to allow for Julian Assange to give testimony as to whether or not Seth and or his brother Aaron Rich were in any way involved in getting the information to WikiLeaks. Now, Assange, up to this point, has never been willing to come out and give up his sources. He's only said that it was not the Russians or any state actor. But he's going to be pressed at this point. And so we don't know if the UK court is going to allow for Assange to testify. We don't know at this point. We just know that the judge in the US has requested that. And we don't know if Assange, given the opportunity, after all this time, will come out and admit that it was, Seth Rich or his brother or whatever. So those things are still, we're waiting to learn those things. But I guess what's interesting, two things about this. First, Seth Rich's parents have always been a bit of a mystery to me. When this first happened, Seth Rich's parents came out and they had joined a local group of people who were supporting them and wanted to help the Riches find out who was responsible for murdering Seth Rich. And shortly thereafter, what happened was the DNC, Democratic National Committee, ponied up the money to pay this high-powered law firm that they use, which does damage control, spin control for Democrats when they get themselves in trouble. And so they dispatched an attorney who specializes in this kind of PR spin named Mr. Bauman, B-A-U-M-A-N, Mr. Bauman. And we talked a lot about Mr. Bauman back in the summer and the fall of 2016. So Mr. Bauman goes to the Riches and shuts them down. He pretends that he wants to get to the bottom of who killed Seth Rich, but in the process of doing that, he shuts down the Riches, and then he begins taking over all communications. You don't hear from Seth Rich's parents anymore. All the, if anyone wants to know about anything, Mr. Bauman is now speaking on behalf of the Riches. And he continues to spin the yarn about any accusations or suggestions that it was something other than what's, a failed robbery or whatever, or that Seth Rich had something to do with the WikiLeaks or whatever. Anything like that was a conspiracy theory. And but we have reason to believe from observing the Riches over the years that they may have been under some sort of duress, that they may be extorted in some way, that Mr. Bauman may have been pressuring the Riches not to pursue things, and it's very likely that what Mr. Bauman might be extorting the Riches with is to say that, well, it's possible that your other son, Aaron, might have been involved in this too, and if this all comes out and it turns out that they did, that Seth and Aaron did have something to do with the WikiLeaks, your son Aaron could be, facing many, many years in prison. And I think that this may be the extortion tactic that's been used against the Riches, because they've sent mixed signals over the years as Mr. Butowski has contacted them and spoke to them, if other people have spoken to them, and they seem to be terrified, absolutely terrified, to want to pursue really getting to the truth, or at least ways trying to find out if their son or sons were involved in the WikiLeaks thing. They seem to shoot that down as a conspiracy theory, but then at the same time, they'll speak to Mr. Butowski and seem to be open with him in that conversation, but if too much heat is brought on them, then they shut down. So it's very strange. Having observed this for quite a few years now, what's been going on, it's very strange, the Riches' reaction to this, and it's the reason I believe that they are somehow being extorted, or that there's being pressure put on them by Mr. Bauman on behalf of the DNC to keep the Riches quiet, particularly about further investigation into this. On one hand, Bauman and the DNC and all these people say, yeah, we want to find out who's responsible for Rich's murder, but in every single case that you see, whether it was with the local Metropolitan Police in D.C. being shut down, whether it's the relationship of Debbie Blabbermouth Wasserman Schultz's brother being the district attorney there that was over the case, shutting it down. All the things that we've seen that seem to want to shut the Riches down, while at the same time saying they want to get to the bottom of it. Clearly proving that they really don't want to get to the bottom of it. What they want is to make it go away and make the Riches stay silent. So this is why I kind of think something may be going on here. So this case is actually being brought by the Riches against Fox News. Now, if the Riches really wanted this just to go away, I mean, suing Fox News is not going to bring their son back. It's certainly not going to let the story just go away. It's not going to keep people from pursuing, independent people pursuing getting to the bottom of it. It's only going to stir all this back up again. I don't know whether the Riches have anything to gain, unless they think there's some money waiting for them in this deal. But it seems strange that they would continue to proceed forward with this case against Fox News. And of course, we know the Riches don't have a lot of money, not to pay the type of high-priced lawyers that you need to pursue this type of case. And it's likely that their funding is coming from somewhere else, and I don't know where. But it's just very interesting that they would want to continue with this case, knowing good and well the facts of the case, knowing good and well that Assange has stated that it was not a state actor and that he has suggested that it was Seth Rich, and the very fact that they have Mr. Butowski, who they've spoken to on the phone and seem to have a good rapport with, a decent relationship with, and he has told them firsthand that Ellen Ratner told him that it was their son, Seth, and possibly his brother that were involved in the WikiLeaks thing. So the Riches know this. So why would they continue to pursue it? If the Riches are not wanting to advance the conspiracy theory that their son or sons were involved in it, why would they want to go forward with the case, knowing good and well it is only going to, dredge all this back up again? But at the same time, you're going to have Butowski and Ratner giving sworn statements that in fact Assange told them, or Assange told Ratner and she told Butowski that the Riches, one or both of the Riches boys, were involved. And then you're going to go so far as to have a judge try to compel Assange to testify, knowing good and well what Assange has already said. He said it was definitely not the Russians and no state actor, and he suggested, and he's done various things that certainly give the impression that it was Seth Rich. So why would the Riches want to go down this road? The only thing I can think of is because they actually do want to get to the truth, even if it proves that their son or sons were involved in the, transfer of the information to WikiLeaks. That's what that tells me. So the motivation behind the Riches is still up in the air. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. It could be exactly what it looks like, that they really believe that Butowski or Ratner lied to Butowski, or that Assange really didn't tell her that, or that Assange is not going to, say, yeah, it was the Riches or whatever. Maybe the Riches believe this, but I find that hard to believe, me personally. I think the Riches know exactly where everything is, and that they have to know that going down this road could very likely expose that their son or sons were involved. Now, maybe they've had a change of heart. Maybe Aaron has done some research and discovered that maybe he wouldn't be facing any criminal liability. Maybe it's safe now to go get the truth. And we don't seem to see Mr. Bauman around anymore. So maybe the pressure's been lifted, because maybe the DNC and whoever was paying them, well, Mr. Bauman, his firm, maybe the DNC has quit paying them. So now there's no reason for them to defend the DNC and pressure or whatever, put pressure or whatever on the Riches. Now maybe this will put the pressure back on them, but it's moving forward. The judge has already made the request to the court in the UK to have Assange testify, give testimony as to the validity of the accusations made by Ratner and Butowski. So again, I don't. It's there's two different ways that this could go. I mean, either the riches are this looks exactly like what it is, and the riches really believe that Assange will tell the truth, or and say no, the Rich's boys weren't involved in it. That's a rumor. It wasn't Russian actors. It wasn't state actors, but it wasn't the Rich's boys either. It was someone else. Maybe that's what the Riches really believe, but I would think, being the parents of Seth Rich, they would have followed the story pretty closely. They would know exactly what Assange has made reference to, and they certainly know about what Butowski was told by Ratner, because he told them. He's talked to the Riches several times on the phone and has a good relationship or rapport with them, or did have. Maybe he's back talking to them again, because maybe now that Mr. Bauman and the DNC and probably the rotten Reverend Clinton or whoever was paying this PR firm to do the spin job, maybe now that they're not being paid anymore, they're no longer representing the DNC, they're no longer in the picture. Maybe now the Riches are free to pursue the truth, regardless of where it leads. So that's the two ways that this looks like it could be going. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It's just, but that's my analysis of the two possibilities of what may be going on here. Either the Riches are, still have tunnel vision and believe that it's a conspiracy theory that their son was murdered because of having something to do with the leaks, or they've now opened up to the fact that it's a possibility, and that finding out what happened is worth whatever turmoil that they churn up as a result of continuing to move this process forward. Because they could drop the defamation case and this would all go away, because you don't hear the word Seth Rich spoken in the major media anymore, and you haven't had for 2 years. It's almost taboo. I mean, the only reason that this could possibly get stirred back up again is because the Riches going forward with the case. Otherwise, it wouldn't. It would just kind of disappear into the ether. So there's something going on here. I think that's obvious. Something going on here, and it'll be very interesting to see whether or not the judge will allow Assange to testify, and if so, will Assange provide any further evidence or make any further statements that would suggest that the Riches, one of the Rich boys or both, had something to do with it. He's already said it definitely wasn't the Russians. Of course, as we know, Uncle Bob the executioner did not interview Assange, and for very good reason. Because Assange was not going to tell Uncle Bob what he needed to pursue the phony Trump-Russia investigation. He was going to tell Uncle Bob just the opposite. So certainly didn't want to be talking to Assange, the one guy who absolutely would know. Now, John Durham, this has got to get his attention. He certainly has heard about this. He absolutely has heard about this, and he knows the important role that the WikiLeaks alleged hack played in this whole fiasco that he's now investigating. It formed the basis, the early basis, the basic structure for how the Trump-Russia case was going to be pursued. The original conspiracy theory of Trump-Russia was born out of the DNC hack. So certainly John Durham understands the impact this could have. So Durham has to be looking at this and going, wait a minute, what if Assange is granted the right to testify by the court in the UK, and he does come out and show and provide some evidence that in fact it was not the Russians, and in fact it was some other actors, such as Seth Rich, or an intermediary acting on behalf of Seth Rich, or his brother, or someone like that. What if Assange blows up the Russia narrative and can prove it? That would drastically affect John Durham's investigation, because the entire investigation is based on the fact that they began investigating Trump because of this association with Russia, possibly having worked with the Russians to hack the DNC and give the stuff to WikiLeaks. That is the very early, that's kind of the origins of the Trump-Russia narrative. which would have a huge impact on the John Durham investigation. So John Durham certainly is aware by now of the fact that this judge is requesting testimony from Assange. And you got to be thinking to yourself, maybe Durham's going to think, wait a minute, if this judge grants Assange, grants his court the right to interview Assange, and he does provide some information, maybe I should be talking to him too. He's a critical, important key component of my investigation. And what happens if Durham goes through his entire investigation, and then, because this thing with Assange is not going to be worked out for months and months and months, way after the election. It's going to take, even if the judge rules, yeah, Assange can testify, you can come here and question him, this process is going to take months and months and months. So Durham's got to be thinking, I got to be careful here. If I go through my entire investigation, working from the Trump-Russia narrative, working from the narrative that we've been given that the DNC was hacked by the Russians, and then we find out after my investigation is over, 6 months, a year later, Assange comes out and provides evidence that it was not the Russians. In fact, it was Rich or someone else working on his behalf, or someone else. Then that kind of blows up Durham's investigation too, because he would have missed the biggest, thing in the investigation, the very origins of it, which is why he was appointed in the first place, to find out what the origins were for why they investigated Trump. And it was the alleged hack of the DNC. So this has some implications for the Durham investigation, and he would certainly be interested. And if he finds out that this court in the UK is going to allow Assange to be interviewed, and assuming that Assange agrees and gives some information or provides some evidence, Durham is going to be very interested, and he may want a piece of that action himself. It will certainly, if Assange comes out and provides some evidence that it was not the Russians, and if he provides further evidence that it was, in fact, the Riches or someone else, then that drastically affects this whole narrative. It blows the entire Russian narrative up, and everything that's based on the Russian narrative gets blown up. The Mueller witch hunt blown up, the Durham investigation would get blown up, unless he uncovers the true origins. If Durham comes out with his report and he just works from the current narrative that the Russians hacked the DNC, and then 6 months, a year later, that gets blown up, a year from now, the Durham investigation appears to have missed a gigantic piece of evidence, a gigantic problem with the Durham investigation. The basis of his investigation, of what got this all started, will be completely blown up. And then everything that came after that will also be brought into question. So Durham's smart enough to know that a revelation by Assange, backed up with some evidence, could dramatically affect his investigation as well. So John Durham is probably paying very close attention to this. I'm sure it perked his ears up when he heard about it, and I wouldn't be surprised if he might be interested himself in maybe having a little talk with Julian Assange. Mueller wasn't interested, and we know why. Durham might be. So that is my take on that. All you have to do is go to any major media site, other than left-wing sites, obviously, and you can read about the story. I think I saw maybe the Gateway Pundit or one of the Citizen Free Press, I think it was Citizen Free Press is where I got the original link to the story. So, but now there's a bunch of stories about it, so you can probably find it about anywhere. But you may want to look into that. I think it's a very interesting development. It could blow this Spygate thing wide open. Julian Assange always has had the ability to blow this entire thing wide open. All he had to do is produce the evidence, and we know he's got it. We know Assange has the evidence to prove who actually provided those emails to WikiLeaks. He's always had that evidence. Always. Let's see what happens. Paul Sperry. Paul Sperry is reporting that sources, and he's specifically talking to one. He names one of these sources, but there's several individuals he's talking to who have worked with John Durham in past investigations. He names one of those in this story. So Paul Sperry, his latest article, he's reporting that sources who he's spoken with who have worked with John Durham in the past say that Durham will not bow to political pressure in his Spygate investigation and likely will drop bombshells before Labor Day. And then they're speaking specifically with a retired FBI agent named Chris Swicker, who worked with Durham on the Whitey Bulger case. And he says that he expects Durham will drop criminal charges. Otherwise, he said, Durham would have folded up this investigation by now. The fact that it's gone on this long and the things that he's doing tell him that Durham is definitely pursuing criminal charges. Also, he said that Durham knows that if Biden wins the election, that his investigation will be neutered. And so he said that Durham knows he needs to come out before Election Day with at least some sort of a preliminary report or finding or some charges or some plea deals or something in order to protect his investigation so that it can stay alive in the event that Trump loses. Swicker also says that Durham is looking into the Ukraine angle and what role they played in the 2016 election, such as the role officials in Kiev, the DNC, and the Obama administration played in efforts to dig up dirt on Trump. Durham's team has been working out of his Connecticut offices in New Haven while taking frequent trips abroad. He says that Durham has obtained data and metadata from 2 BlackBerry devices used by Joseph Mifsud. He says that Mifsud's interaction with George Papadopoulos was the reason that the FBI gave for beginning Operation Crossfire Hurricane, and we of course know that as a fact. So here is FBI agent, veteran FBI agent, high-level FBI agent too. He was one of the top people in Connecticut, FBI agents, top FBI agent in Connecticut, who's worked with Durham on past cases. Said that Durham is not at all influenced by political decisions. He understands that there's this 60-day rule that you don't drop something within 60 days of an election. He said Durham has worked around this type of thing before and understands it. He also says that Durham is looking into the Ukraine thing. Now, that's the first I've heard any confirmation whatsoever that Durham has even been interested, or the first time I've heard anything about Durham looking into the Ukraine aspect of it, because we've wondered for a long time whether Durham would look into that, because if you're looking to the origins, you certainly will find yourself in Ukraine, because that's another place where the origins of the Spygate story began. It was with the work that was being done by Chalupa, working for the DNC, working with Ukraine officials. We know the FBI set up a office actually in the Ukraine embassy in the U.S. to work with these officials. We know that some of these NSC people, Fiona Hill and some of these other people, have connections to various people in Ukraine, and a lot of this stuff was flowing from the NSC. We know about Colonel Vindman and his friends being a part of that. Eric Ciaramella, the so-called whistler, was also involved heavily in the Ukrainian aspect of all of this. So that's why I've always felt it was critically important that you couldn't really understand the origins of the Spygate story without understanding what was going on in Ukraine. And this is the first time I've heard anyone, especially someone who is not in a formal capacity on this investigation, but has worked with Durham, a fairly well-respected high-level FBI agent, saying that he knows that Durham has been very interested in the Ukraine angle in the Spygate investigation. So that, I think, is something very important that we've learned. Of course, we knew about them getting Mifsud's phones, but he doesn't really say what may have been learned from that, other than saying that he knows that Durham has got 2 of Mifsud's BlackBerries and that he has gotten the data and the metadata from them. And you can learn a lot of things from the metadata and the data from those phones. Okay, so here's another story that came out yesterday, and again, I don't think this is so much a big surprise or rumor. I was surprised the story I read made such a big deal about it, but it's this like rumor that Judge Sullivan is going to be removed from the Flynn case. Well, I don't really know that that's so much rumor, because it came out a couple of days ago, that the court had sent Sidney Powell a letter and said, hey, in this next hearing, August 11th, when you show up for the hearing, make sure that you're prepared to make your case for why Sullivan should be removed from the case. So you have the court telling Sidney Powell, hey, when we meet again on the 11th to decide what's going to happen here, make sure that you're prepared to make your argument of why Sullivan should be pulled off this case. So I don't think that it's so much a rumor story that Judge Sullivan will be removed from the Flynn case. I think it's logical to assume that eventually Sullivan will probably be removed from the case because he just can't quit misbehaving, and also because it's an option that the defense has to make the case that he should be removed. What's interesting about this is that it's the court advising Sidney Powell, Flynn's lawyer, hey, make sure when you show up that you're prepared. If you weren't planning on doing that, make sure that when you show up here, you're prepared to make the case for why we should remove Sullivan from the case. So rumor or speculation, whatever you want to call it, I think it's just logical. The only thing that's interesting about it is that the court is telling Sidney Powell, sending her a letter and saying, hey, make sure you come prepared to argue that point. So I think that's, but I wouldn't designate that as rumor. I think it's just logical. We also learned something recently based on the deposition that Christopher Steele recently gave in London in the case against Gubarev. And of course now we know there's the case against Fusion GPS, and Glenn Simpson is now beginning here in the U.S. By the same lawyers. Well, actually it's different lawyers, but working for the same client. The three Alpha Bank guys who own Alpha Bank. And it appears that, as we all know, the BuzzFeed released the dossier, and the way that they got it was that Kramer, Senator Magoo's right-hand man Kramer, went to BuzzFeed's offices where he met with Ken Bensinger. He showed the dossier to Bensinger, and then Kramer said, well, I'm going to step out and go to the bathroom, and, I'm going to leave the dossier here. So while he goes to the bathroom, that's when Bensinger takes photographs of the pages of the dossier, and that's how he gets it to release it. Then Kramer comes back, takes the dossier, and says, oh, by the way, I don't want you to release anything. And then he walks away. And then we hear the story that Steele was very upset by the fact that Kramer went and met with Bensinger over at BuzzFeed and allowed him access to the dossier while he went to the bathroom, clearly wanting to give Bensinger the opportunity to photograph the documents, so that Kramer would have plausible deniability to say, hey, I didn't give it to Bensinger to release. I went to the bathroom and I just happened to leave the dossier on his desk, and he must have photographed it while I was in the bathroom. Imagine that. And we were first told that Steele, and what Steele had said previously, was that he was upset at the fact that this had been released by BuzzFeed, that he never intended it to go public. It was only meant for the FBI to use as a tool to investigate. But now, what has come out and from his recent testimony, his deposition in this recent court case in the UK, is that in fact, Christopher Steele himself met with Ken Bensinger at BuzzFeed in January of 2017, just before the dossier was released. So there you go, Christopher Steele likely caught in another lie. He was all in and working with Kramer to make sure that Bensinger could get photocopy the pages of the dossier so they could release it. So there you go, and you got to wonder, was the FBI working with Steele on that too? More to find out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. See you. Bye.